Welcome to Season 7 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that's dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from around the globe who believe the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode is brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by Leanne Butterworth, who is the founder of Empathy First, a social enterprise based in Brisbane, Australia, that's on a mission to create happy, healthy workforces and communities through interactive, accessible empathy training. Leanne is also the host of the Empathy Podcast. A few years ago, she experienced some postnatal mental health issues, and that's when she came across empathy-based listening and communication. Today, Leanne believes empathic leadership is no longer a nice to have, but a business of imperative. Welcome to the show, Leanne.
Oh, thank you.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for coming, because it's me, the sun is setting, and you're already into the next day as we're having this conversation. I'm so grateful that technology has brought us together. It's so nice to meet you. I want to start with a really, just for as a point of reference, when I learned about the work that you're doing, I went onto your website. I love your website. And this is a couple of things that I spotted. Okay. So let me just read to you what's on your website. The days of profit at all costs is over. Great resignation is coming. Only empathic organizations will survive. And then you write, in a recent poll, 83% of staff, so that's like 4 out of 5, right? More than 4 out of 5, say that they would consider leaving their job for a more empathic organization. And I think what's happening, and the time for empathic leadership is now, right? So you're in the epicenter of exactly being right. So what's the backstory of what brought you to empathy in the first place?
Well, it's a bit of a complicated story, but it was almost like the intersection of two stories coming together that I went, oh, this is a thing. So firstly, I started working with a small nonprofit, and I created a project called Lose Your Mind. And it was a virtual reality simulation of psychosis. And we ran that here in Australia and in America for police and psychs and magistrates. And it's like the advanced empathy course. And I created with some psychs a lovely workshop that went with that. And it was all about advanced mental health literacy. And what happened was I kept finding people were getting the same questions wrong. People didn't have a fundamental understanding of what empathy was in order to build this advanced mental health training onto. So what was happening at the same time was I had late diagnosed postnatal depression. And it was late diagnosed because I dismissed it in myself. So I had this sort of self-stigma of people like me, and I did everything right, and it's just nothing, and mental health happens to other people, and medication is bad. Like this huge misperception about the whole thing. And also the people around me were like, oh, the days are long, the years are short, we all get through it. Cherish these moments, just go for a walk. The medication comes in 2 varieties, red and white. And so once I kind of pulled that apart, I went, oh, hang on, my story has value here. My story of not being surrounded by empathetic communication has value here. And then when COVID hit and virtual reality, so putting stuff on people's faces, was no longer an option. So that was the beginning of 2020, as everybody knows, obviously. But virtual reality died, and I went, there's something here, that this commonality that everybody's missing. And so I put together Empathy First as it stands now, and I put it together as online training, and I pulled everything apart, like all of my slides, I cut them out and I laid them all out, and I went, all right, what have I got here? And the more I did the digging and the research, I went, hang on, nobody's talking about this. Why is nobody talking about this? Because I can see personally the impact, or the negative impact, of not being surrounded by empathy, of people not knowing, of people pushing away, of people thinking it's this achievement at all costs, and creating huge disconnection. And so what happened was, the more I built empathy first. I went, hang on, this is bigger than I think it is. And then when I studied social enterprise at university and looked at human-centered design and empathy being the first step of human-centered design, and going, but nobody's talking about this. It's all these throwaway lines like, oh, listen without judgment, or just empathize. And you're like, but there's so many definitions of empathy and so many benefits. So it was trying to distill it all down into a way that was easily communicated, and then bringing my story into it, my why of going, this is why this is life and death. This is why this will save lives. It's why it will save businesses. And we all have those stories of our worst boss ever and why we left. We all have behavior change as a result of not receiving really good, practical, purposeful, as you say, empathy. So that's, the more I do this, the more I study about it, the more I read about it, the more I research about it, the more I go, hang on, you can't have Wellbeing Wednesday without empathy. You can't have yoga on a Friday without empathy. You can't do diversity and inclusion training unless you have an empathetic culture where every single person feels heard, valued, and visible. So I get a bit excited about it.
So I want to unpack some more of your work in a second, but you just mentioned something that I didn't know about you, which I find fascinating. This work that you were doing with VR, because I've written a little bit about new technology and how VR can be used within certain contexts to actually try to elevate empathy, whether it's with police forces, or I think what you're describing is actually like a really good example. So some people have psychosis and they have no idea what that actually feels like. So can you tell me a little bit more about this VR project and what your own personal opinion is about VR training?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have quite a strong opinion about it. The way that I do it is, we know that there are 3 types of empathy. That's the model that I play with. And a lot of virtual reality plays in the cognitive. What is it like to be you? Now, I take it more into the compassionate space, where I give people this 3.5-minute experience of what it's like to have psychosis, and it's in 360 video, so it is very real. So some people go very much into the first person experience of it and forget that they're in Iowa or Brisbane or wherever it is. And what we then do is we pull them out of it, we wrap them back up, we give them a hug, and we go, right, I want you to tell somebody what that was. So we don't go into what must it like to be them. We go, right, I want you to tell somebody, and everybody kind of jibber jabbers around and goes, I don't have the words. I go, good. Because we tell people, we'll just speak up and just describe it, and just all these just words as though it's just that simple. And then by unpacking that, I go, yeah, but you're expecting someone to verbalize what they're going through. And that's actually really hard. And then I say to people, what did you want after we stopped the VR? And a lot of people go, oh, I just needed a quiet moment. I just needed a hug. And then a bunch of people go, I just wanted a drink. I just wanted to smoke. And I say, why? And they say, because I wanted to calm my nerves and I wanted to never think about that again. I go, excellent. You're not having one, but excellent. So that helps us with the judgment and stigma around coping mechanisms, because undiagnosed psychosis in the USA is 74 weeks. And I say to them, if you had that on and off for 74 weeks, I'm pretty sure you're reaching for something stronger than a smoke or a drink. You're probably going for your harder drugs that really make it go away. And they go, So it's not, wow, it must be awful to have that. It's, whoa. So then we look at the bucket of mental health, which is everybody has a vulnerability and a level of stress at which their bucket is going to overflow. So then if we look at people who experience, let's say, psychosis, which is part of a lot of different mental health conditions, quite often they'll have genetics or childhood trauma or brain changes and a level of stress at which their bucket overflowed. And in order to cope with that overflow, they turn to drugs or groups where they felt they belonged that perhaps weren't the most healthy. So it's pulling all of that together and going, it's not about what must that be like? What must it be like to have a mental illness? No. If I was struggling with this, I don't want an action plan. I don't want to be dealt with. I don't want to be manhandled. I want a hug.
Yeah. It's to humanize it.
Absolutely. So the thing about a lot of VR in my experience is we almost dehumanize it by going, oh, that's what it's like to be you. And then because we don't, and so we play in that cognitive space. And because we don't have the empathetic language skills, we can very quickly cause disconnection by then going, well, I know what it's like to be you.
Right.
And that's not the first step of human-centered design. It's to actually suspend your values and get curious about the other person, not then go, well, I know what it's like to be a refugee. I know what it's like to be like disabled. No, you don't. So that's where the listening and the communicating comes in. But when you do the VR just by itself without the empathy training attached to it, you can actually, and one of the things that we found was we can actually increase stigma. Mm-hmm. So we once did it and we did a test. We did our virtual reality without the training attached. And we did a study before and after, and we found that people actually went, yeah, no, they were more stigmatized. So it was a very small group. And we reached out to them again after. But yeah, without the empathy piece, it's almost voyeurism.
Yeah.
So that's the issue that I have. So I will not do my virtual. I've had people say, hey, can you do VR in the lobby of our building? And I said, no, I won't do it. I will not do it without that empathy training attached of what is empathy, why does it matter, and how do you listen, validate, understand, connect, and respond.
Okay, so you're speaking to the converted here when I ask this question, but for the sake of the audience, why do you think empathy training is so important for leadership right now?
Well, it's absolutely fundamental to all relationships. And when you boil down any business, it's all about the relationships. So whether it's relationships with customers, relationships with clients, relationships with your peers, relationships with your staff, yourself, your board, it's all about healthy relationships where every single person feels heard, valued, and visible. Because as much as we don't want to believe it belongs in business, humans are emotional species. We make decisions based on emotion. And when we've got people in business who don't understand that, or who take the human out of human resources and treat people as resources, that's when people feel disconnected. That's when people will say, I don't like going to work. People put in less effort when they don't like going to work. And I get people to do an activity where I go, write down what you guys want for your customers, for yourselves, for your teams. And at the top of the list, it's always heard, understood, respected, empowered. And they never write down paid or fun. And I go, but that's where a lot of places start. They start with bonuses and ping pong tables. And that's not what people want. That's not what people are craving. So empathy training, a lot of people will think, oh, I've got to learn about other people and I've already got enough going on and there's too much and you're just going to make me care more about other people and I don't have the capacity. And I'm like, that's not what empathy training is. Empathy training is about unlearning a heap of stuff. It's about unlearning judgment, unlearning bias, unlearning insecurity, unlearning misplaced values so that you can then look at this beautiful human in front of you as their whole self, not wear it, not carry it, have healthy boundaries, regroup and bring your whole self to this next beautiful human who wants nothing more than to feel heard in that moment.
So I'm going to ask a question. So sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but let me ask you a follow-up question. It's I'm putting on my cynic hat.
Yes.
Imagine, some leader, some C-suite leader says, "Oh, we're a performance-driven company. We don't have time for all this." What would you say?
Good luck. See how long that lasts. What's your turnover? What's your turnover rate? What's your retention like? What do your customers say about you? What do your staff say about you when the doors are closed? When they're talking to their friends, do they find joy in their work and put in more effort, or are they hiding in the toilets because you are burning them out? And whether that's sales, like I've done a podcast on empathy and sales, and if you don't truly understand and respect your customer for more than what they can do for you, you will lose them. Like, emotion is the number one driver of customer loyalty. So you can't, on one hand, because I guarantee you that company as well is not projecting profits over everything out to their audiences. They're saying, we care. We want you to succeed. We care about our people. But behind closed doors, if they're profit above all else, there are other impacts of that. There are other people will leave. People won't buy from you. People will tell their friends not to buy from you. Like, one of the worst bosses I ever had, his 2 goals in life was to make money and make people cry. And I loved my job. I didn't like him. And not only did I leave that company, but I won't buy from that company again. And he doesn't even work there anymore. So those days of believing that it is performance at all costs have not figured out yet that you get better performance, and Belinda Palmer's found this beautifully. You get better performance when you treat people with respect and make them feel valued. Your performance actually goes up, and it's your insecurities that are actually holding you back, and that's not good enough anymore because people will leave. So I think it's very misguided for people to say we go profit above people, not realizing that the research is showing the more you put people first, the more money you will make, because customers are more loyal, staff are more loyal, your reputation is better. And I mean, there are companies that have put in Baird at Wall Street. They put in an anti-asshole policy. Like, they will not tolerate this profit at all costs, and they're on Wall Street.
Right. So you've alluded to a couple of things, but like, what's the risk in your mind of getting it wrong or doing nothing?
Your business will fail in the long run. I mean, unemployment at the moment is so low. We have choice where we work. And if people don't leave businesses, they leave managers. So if we're not investing in our managers and our leaders and our boards having a human first approach, having a empathetic approach to business, your best people will leave because they expect better.
Today's episode was brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. How has your work about empathy changed your personal relations?
Primarily with myself. I was, up until my recovery from postnatal depression, I was codependent, perfectionist, insecure, profit above all. Empathy is scary because I don't have the capacity. I don't know what to say. I don't want to get it wrong. I was unsolicited advice, left, like that's still my default. And I've got to catch myself and use the skills like on a daily basis that I've learned. So a lot of the things that I research are really to explain it to myself quite often, because I didn't grow up with this. This was not a conversation. So when I'm talking to my friends now, or when I'm talking to my children, it's very much, I don't need to come up with an answer. I don't need to fix this. I need to listen. I need to make sure that you know that you are safe and that you feel loved, and whatever you're feeling is perfectly fine. And that's hard because I want to make it all better. But so for me, that's the impact. So it's been me figuring out that I don't have to fix everybody. I have to love and hear everybody. So I say this thing in my training of people are humans to be heard, not problems to be solved. And that's one that rings really true for me, because then I can sit back, not wear their problems, not feel their emotions for them, but I have good boundaries, and my job is to make people feel heard. and practice good self-care. And that's not selfish, which means I can bring my whole self. Now, it has backfired once. And that's when my daughter, when she was 8, she and I, because she's 8 or 9, and her inner 13-year-old brings out my inner 13-year-old, and then we just end up going fine at each other. But there was once where she goes, Mum, you're not being very empathetic or supportive right now. And I had to go, yes, you are right. I am sorry. And I had to regroup, and I was called out by my 8-year-old. Because it's a learning journey. Like, people who say you're either born with this or you're not, it's not true. You have to practice this stuff. You have to be open to it and be interested in it and look at how other people are expressing it and how other people make you feel. And yeah, so I'm a work in progress as well, but that's the benefit that I found is my friends, when we did a thing last year, we did a branding thing. And people will say that I'm a good listener and I'm empathetic. And I go, whew. So it definitely has, it takes practice, but it's worth it.
Right. So hence the empathy training comes in. So you've developed a model actually that illustrates what empathy training can actually achieve. And the 4 things that you put out to the world is that, okay, improved relationships, improved employee engagement and well-being, improved customer satisfaction, and improved business performance. So, when you think of an organization and think about outcomes like that, what are businesses waiting for in your mind? Like, why are there still holdouts?
I think there's a few things. So in Australia and the USA, I mean, they're very, and I know you're in Canada, but we're very individualistic mindset. As opposed to collectivist, what's best for the group. So very individualistic, very masculine, which is achievement at all costs. And that's the culture that we live in. So there is still that misperception about what empathy even is. Like, people still think it's just feeling the feelings. That's all it is. It's just feeling the feelings. I'm like, no, it's bigger than that. So there's this misperception and misunderstanding about what empathy actually is. So once I explain it to them, they go, that makes perfect sense. There's also this misperception about what empathy training is. And they think it's all just give. It's all about the customers. It's about learning about the cognitive experience of other people. I'm like, no, it's a lot of unlearning. It's a lot of self-reflection. You will learn so much more about yourself than you will about other people in empathy training. So there's those 2 pieces of the puzzle. And also, we in Australia last year had empathy training make the news because it was used as a punitive measure for some of our politicians. So I had to then get on the front foot and go, actually, this isn't punishment. This is for people who are genuinely interested in other people. It's not just high fives and group hugs. It's no. How do I communicate in a way that makes people feel heard, valued, and visible? How do I become aware of my own empathy gap? How do I be aware of how my intentions do not translate? And the actual fatal effect of judgment, stigma, making someone feel dismissed. And I lay it all out and go, you've got no argument. We look at unconscious biases and go, this is how your brain works. Your brain's constantly taking shortcuts, but here's 3 or 4 or 5, depending on the workshop, that are really going to interfere with your ability to hold space for someone and listen to them as their whole self without assumptions, judgment, expectations. So we have to do this awareness piece first, but it's bigger than that. We have to give people really practical skills on how to communicate with this stuff. So there is an education piece there that has to happen, especially in Australia. And there's nobody really singing this from the rafters. So I'm like trying to.
So I often get asked by organizational leaders, like, okay, we're doing a lot of stuff online right now for the last couple of years through COVID. The technology exists, and so here we are. We're doing our interview, right? What would you, so there's two questions. What are some easy takeaways, like things that people could be doing differently to kind of create a more empathic culture, given the actual physical distance and that we're doing this virtually? First question. Second question, now that we're gravitating back to work, and I don't know what the Australian context has been like, but there's been hybrid models. There's been certain provinces or states have reacted to COVID differently. So some people have not been at work for a long time. Some people are starting to come back work. Some people are never going to go to work again. Like that whole thing. What would you say about this new space that we're in, this new reality of hybrid working? How are we going to foster empathic cultures in that context?
The model that I always go to, and the one that I like in order to explain this, kind of empathy sits underneath it as a foundation, but I often use like self-determination theory, which is, it's not about this band-aid approach to making people well. It's not this band-aid approach to like Wellbeing Wednesday and apples in the break room. That's no longer good enough. So the approach that I take for this is looking at engagement as the heart of what it is that we're trying to achieve, not well-being. So engagement actually is the foundation for well-being. So staff who are engaged then experience well-being. It's not well-being makes people feel engaged. In order to get that engagement, you have to look at motivation. And in order to look at motivation, you have to be empathetic to start with. You have to already be looking at people as like valuable humans, not resources. So I use self-determination theory to look at that motivation piece, which is every single person that you're working with, whether they're at home, online, wherever, they all want to feel a sense of autonomy, which is that I have a sense of control over my work. I have a sense of being included. I have a sense of being part of the decision-making of how I spend my time. They also want to feel a sense of relatedness, which is I want to feel part of something bigger. I want to feel part of a purpose. I want to feel part of a team. And again, empathetic communication comes into that. And then I also want to feel a sense of competence, the ability to do my job and interact with people in a healthy, growth-minded way. So that's where empathy training and leadership development and empathetic communication come in. So there are lots of different ways to attack this, but at the foundation, you need that empathetic understanding of what people are going through and how to make them feel heard, valued, and visible. And then on top of that, well, what is it people need to feel motivated to actually achieve engagement and then achieve well-being, which then has all the benefits. So it's that autonomy, relatedness, and connectedness.
So I'm hearing that there's no easy fix. You're not going to run meetings differently on Zoom, and you're not all going to come back and have like the once a week cake together and feel like the organization's going to be more empathic as a result of these little quick fixes. You're saying this is a fundamental shift where people are, what was the three words? Seen, valued, and visible?
So heard, valued, and visible are the three, because that's at their core what people need. Like fundamentally, that's what they need. They need to feel as though they belong, like this sense of belonging as opposed to fitting in. They're two very different things. They need to feel as though they contribute and as though they aren't just being told what to do. And the only way to achieve any of this stuff is through our leaders actually self-reflecting and going, do I project? Am I insecure? Do I micromanage? What am I afraid of? Why don't I? What are my false beliefs about emotions? Do I think that emotions don't belong at work? Because if you have all these false beliefs about emotions, it's then very hard to connect with the emotions of other people.
Right.
So
we are emotional creatures.
Yeah. And if we look at our own internal biases and understand that you don't believe everything you think, like, we're not taught this stuff. And if we look at the real fatality of judgment, I mean, we use lung cancer as an example, and the impact of stigma and judgment on people with lung cancer, potentially who never smoked. We go, no, this stuff really matters. So it's once people start pulling that apart and stop believing everything that they think and stop making assumptions and stop making quick snap or being judgmental, that's where the good stuff happens. Because then in your meetings, you get more creative. Then in your meetings, you get more innovative. That's where businesses start to thrive, because people are working together and coming up with really interesting ideas because they're engaged and because they're not afraid of being made fun of, or they know that their work is valued. So then that's when they get interested and they go, oh, we could do this and we could do this. People who feel as though they're just a cog in the chain, they're not coming up with new and interesting ideas. They're taking days off, or they're doing what's called presenteeism, which is you're there in body but not in spirit. You're hiding in the bathroom. You're on your phone. That's not where creativity, innovation, and like productivity flourish.
Yeah. Well, I think the work you're doing is very, very, very important. No surprise. And it's been such a pleasure to meet you. I have a final question, which I love to ask my guests at the end of the show. And that is, if you can think of a time in your life where you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
Oh, that was my pivotal moment. That was literally my pivotal moment. So when I went, like I said before, my postnatal depression was late diagnosed. And because everybody else was just, no, it's no big deal. And mine was presenting as postnatal rage and suicidal ideation. And so I went to my GP, and she, beautiful woman, said, oh, sweetheart, I think this is bigger than you think it is. And I'm like, I'll be fine. I do exercise. I'm fine. She's like, no, this is not cool. And she said, well, how do you feel about medication? I went, She said, let's try it for a month and see what happens. And I went, oh, okay. She said, I got you. We got this. Like, let's just monitor it, see how we go. And I took the script to the chemist. And the lovely lady at the chemist said, have you taken these before? And I didn't have the kids with me at the time. They were at daycare. And she said, have you taken these before? And I said, no, I haven't. She said, you got this. And so my shirt even says, you got this. She said, you got this. You're doing the right thing. Your kids will thank you for it. You got this. And I wept in the chemist. And so I ended up being on antidepressants for 15 months. They rubbed out the lows, also rubbed out the highs. But if I hadn't done that, I actually genuinely am afraid of what might have happened. And I kind of look at that every day and I think, if I'd done something to Zara or to myself, I would have made the front page of the newspaper, and I would not have been an empathetic character in that story. People wouldn't have gone, wow, the system let her down. It would have been, how could she do that? Like, what a bad mother. And so that tiny glimpse of empathy from those two women, my GP and the chemist, have really changed my life, like literally. And that's why I'm so passionate about this stuff, because I know the impact that it can have. Just that moment of going, togetherness, of saying, let's figure this out. I got you. I'm with you on this. You're doing the right thing.
And it kind of comes full circle to the talk, the chit chat we had about the virtual reality train, where you were saying the point isn't to sort of cognitively imagine what they're going through. The point is to imagine what might be helpful to them to hear or feel in that moment. And that's what both of them did.
Yeah. And at the very end of the day, I mean, I say to people, you can't always guess what people are going through. You can listen and you might never understand. Like, there are experiences that I will never understand. I'll never know what some things are like, and that's fine. But if somebody tells me something, that in and of itself is an act of vulnerability. And I can identify with that. I know what it's like to open up to somebody And what the only thing they need from me in that moment is to feel heard. So even if I go, you know what, I've got no idea what that's like, I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to say I know what it's like to be you. I'm not going to relate it to my own story. But the act of vulnerability that it took for you to tell me that, I'll be grateful for that. I'll acknowledge that. I will identify with that and know that in that moment of vulnerability, the only thing that you need is for me to be my whole present self and be here with you. And sometimes it's a hug. That's it. You don't have to have the right answers. People don't want an action plan or a pamphlet. People don't want to be dealt with. They want to be seen and validated, and that's it. And sometimes it's that act of vulnerability that is the starting point for that.
What a beautiful way to end our conversation, Leanne. It was such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for making the time on your Wednesday morning and my Tuesday evening.
Thank you so much. It was lovely. It was such a lovely chat.
I agree. So thank you all for watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
What if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free from your thinking clutter, make that important decision, or liberate you from whatever is holding you back? At Grant Huron International, you get to choose the coach of your choice anytime from anywhere. Visit grandhuroninternational.com and harness the power of on-demand coaching today.